My name is Carrie Von Esch, and I'm assistant professor at Seattle University, and I was formerly at the University of Washington. And we're going to shift our focus a little bit from building on Su-Yeon's presentation on the teacher's work in the studio days. We're going to now shift our attention to thinking about English learner students and English learner expertise. Sorry, I'm not used to using a clicker. Okay, so before getting into the study itself, I wanted to frame the problem a little bit for us to think about. Is that typically when we think about instruction of English learner students, it's typically done separately than content instruction. So this often looks like EL specialists or EL teachers teach in these EL classes, and then science teachers and science teach science. The same thing holds true for professional development and departments, particularly at the secondary level. So professional development, science professional development often doesn't include attention to English learner students, and science professional development, English learner focused professional development is generally more general and doesn't really focus specifically on science. So what we're going to focus on today is I'm going to talk a little bit about how we began to break down those silos and bring those areas together to support the teaching and learning of EL students in science. Okay, these are our research questions. We're focusing on new roles and social interactions, particularly between science coaches and EL coaches, and then what we began to see is an emergence of science teachers with EL expertise beginning to emerge and share their expertise throughout the network. Really with our methods, we drew on a lot of different data sources, but we really focused on those instances in the studio days where the participants where teams were really focused on discussing English learner students specifically, or English learner instruction specifically. We paid attention to not only what was being said and done, but also who was doing it. So was most of the talk coming from the researchers? Was most of the talk coming from coaches? Did teachers begin to take up some of that work? Okay. So although there was about 20% of the participants in the network who did have EL expertise, it was at times, particularly at the beginning of the study, there were times where this EL expertise was marginalized. So we might go through a studio day, and then at the end of the studio day, someone would say, okay, so what about the English learner students? And so then they would share expertise, but it would be seen more as an add-on. So we had to really learn how to be a little bit more strategic about how to integrate EL expertise. And so one of the ways that we were strategic about it, and this quote is from Ms. Kay, who is an EL coach in the district. One of the ways to be strategic about it was to communicate EL expertise through the science coach. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to skim the quote. And so what Ms. Kay is referring to here is she's identifying that previous siloing that I had talked about earlier. And she's also identifying that focus on English learner instruction in conversations of more general instruction can be marginalized. And so she's saying that focus on science, having the science coaches communicate the EL expertise because science has more cachet, what she calls cachet. Of course, this also required a lot of collaboration between the science and EL coach. And in the next example, we're going to see how that collaboration was important, not only for the communication of EL expertise, but also the development of what we're calling science and English learner hybrid practices. So at Lewitt High School, in Studio Day 4, the science teachers had identified an emphasis on helping their students with their how-why explanations. And so seeing that as an entry point, that focus on discourse as an entry point for English learner-focused work, the science coach, the EL coach, myself, we all collaborated together to design a collaborative, data-driven inquiry for the teachers for them to recognize how their EL students were participating in the science discourse in the classroom. This eventually became a practice that we call hybridized structured talk, which Jen is going to go into a little bit more detail when she talks about how practices travel through the network. And really brought the attention of EL students to, excuse me, I'm forgetting what I'm saying, brought the attention to EL students to the science work. So this idea of collaboration was also very important, not only with the science and EL coaches, but between the EL coaches and the science teachers themselves. So in another school, at South High School, there was a lot of co-planning between the science coach and particularly a teacher with EL certification. And so together they co-planned a lesson and they designed a meta-linguistic tool. And out of this work in that studio day then came another practice, focus on scientific modeling and a focus on disciplinary language instruction. The collaboration then between and this focus, the explicit focus on EL students within the studio days really created space for that teacher, Ms. S, with EL expertise to really begin to emerge as a teacher leader. She began to take on a lot more responsibility and as well as a lot more initiative during the studio days to share her expertise and to lead the EL instructional work. So the work didn't just rely on science coaches and EL coaches anymore, but now the science teachers were beginning to take on that responsibility themselves. So sustaining the EL-focused work within science instruction then really depended on distributing EL expertise. Distributing EL expertise through the leadership and then distributing EL expertise through the teacher leaders that emerged, such as Ms. S. I'm going to conclude my presentation here, so thank you.